Hey everybody, welcome back to Volvara. Today I'll be working on some very general stuff, not necessarily detailing, but just some more large-scaled, less detailed things that might not look good, but are still super important, and actually something that I feel is much more important than all of the ridiculous details and overly intricate scenery pieces that make up most of the way that this project looks. I'll be mostly getting into actually planning some buildings and doing a bit of more or less mass studying to test out how I want to place certain things on the island, which to me is the most important thing. And I definitely want to get into this video a little bit more as I do it, and as I am actually showing off the ways in which I'm building all sorts of walls around the island. But first I want to very quickly say that if I sound terrible while I'm recording this, I have a cold and I wanted to abstain from recording any videos during that period, but you know, I didn't have anything saved, which is also kind of why there's been a terrible lack of videos recently. But there is just no way that I can get around doing this with a cold. I've waited just about long enough for this, but at this time both of my nostrils are sort of open, so I'm just trying to catch this opportunity while I still can, and hopefully it'll be all good again soon. Not necessarily because of my health, there is no reason to worry about that. Literally everybody in the Netherlands has a bad cold right now. It just kind of sucks that I don't really have my voice to be as good as it usually should be. Anyway, that's just a small issue that I hope you don't mind too much. In the rest of this video though, the focus is just going to be on what I'm building and not what I'm just going to be complaining about. So the stuff that I was mostly very worried about when I started this series, and I can't even pronounce the word worried anymore. I don't know why I always have such trouble with that. You'll probably notice that in every one of my videos, but what I was very cautious about, I guess, in this entire series is how I put down all of the buildings, like all of the different mass of the towers and the dome and all of the actual building meat that is going to connect all of these things. Because as nice as all the details and things like that are, I think detailing is actually not the most important thing to making builds. Some of my favorite builds are not necessarily very detailed at all, and I think really the most important thing is that you set up the composition well. And while this usually revolves around general park layouts and how certain buildings work together, like for example, one of my favorite things I've ever done is still some of the first buildings I've ever built in the game for the station of the coaster in Grizzly Valley, because even though it might look terrible by today's standards, I just like the composition, the way that the buildings work together, the way that all of the dimensions work in the buildings, just about feels right. And that is a very important thing that I feel is sometimes overlooked, because it's so very basic to how everything else is gonna look. You could have a very terrible composition of buildings or parts of buildings, and it would just be a waste of time to add all this detail to it, because you're essentially just putting sprinkles over a pile of poo. And while there is definitely no kind of subjective way to look at however ways buildings are composed or whatever their dimensions are, there is still a general sort of idea of whatever feels right or looks good. And that is what I wanted to get to in this series. It's also why me getting a nice feel for the way that buildings are put together doesn't so much revolve around me planning the buildings on paper and working out exactly how I want to lay out everything before I do it, but that's also kind of why I do all of my quote-unquote planning in-game. So you'll see me a lot of the times just kind of messing with roof heights like I just did, or placing walls and looking at that wall from every single angle just to see how it fits into the entire picture. And only after I've done all of that and all of the walls are put together do I ever want to get into detailing. So a lot of this in this episode is just kind of like you do painting, just trying some stuff and taking a distance again and seeing what it looks like and how everything fits together, and if it works, just kind of move on to the next part. Occasionally, I do want to detail though, because when it comes to sort of planning your stuff ahead like this, there are definitely some things that really dictate the look of a certain thing. So this tower, for example, I did want to get into some of the detailing of it, just because having the top part of this tower actually finished gives a much better and much clearer idea of how this tower would fit into the whole when it is actually finished. And then the rest of the tower, like the lower part, which is a clusterfuck with the coaster track and details like windows and stuff, is something that I feel safe getting into later on, because it doesn't so much dictate the way that this tower looks as the top part does. So yeah, that's just much of my work, and that's also why in a lot of my stuff in Planet Coaster, I rarely ever draw out things, because I just feel so much better getting an idea of how things are going to look in-game, and I spend a lot of my non-time-lapse time just placing stuff, removing it again because it doesn't look good, moving it 10 centimeters and looking at it again. Just that kind of trial and error process to see how everything should fit together. It can be very boring at parts, but I think it is quite important. And not everything is just endlessly detailing, I suppose, in that sense. But the way that the entire picture comes together, for me, is still the most important part. So yeah, I'm taking quite a bit of time for that. I'm actually starting to be a bit concerned about how long this project is still going to take, because it is an infamously annoying project of mine that I kind of do love and hate at the same time. Problem with a project like this, for me personally, and also kind of the reason why I wouldn't so much recommend doing it, is that it just feels overly ambitious, and by the time I'm working on a lot of these things, I'm not really innovating anymore, and that's a pretty big problem for me. I've actually had a comment about this recently as well, that there's been kind of a lack of innovation on the channel, at least in terms of the content of what I'm doing in Planet Coaster, since a lot of it is still very much the same, and I'm very much treading ground that, you know, I've already treaded with some of the earlier episodes of Volvara, and now I'm just sitting out the ride, in a sense. And that's just the annoying part of this. It's a very time-consuming thing that's sort of based on this end image of how it should look in the end, but a lot of the ways in which you come at that are already established at a very early part. So the earliest episodes already established what the rest of the episodes are going to look like, and there's no opportunity to delve into new themes. There's no way to, as you would in a small park that you're building with multiple areas, there's no way to delve into a new area and try some new things and get innovative. Everything just has to fit together, and is just a continuation of what I already have. And in that sense, it kind of feels like it's holding me back. I want to sit out this ride for sure, because I still want to finish that image of what I intended, what I set out to do when I started this series. I just can't help but feel like, you know, there are some other things I could have built in this time that maybe would have been really cool and innovative that I couldn't do because I'm working on Volvara. And if that sounds very pretentious and stupid, it definitely is. It's just one of the reasons why I find it sometimes hard to work on this thing, even though I like the way it is working out so far, and I really still want to see that end image, which is just a good motivation. There's just something about this that is kind of hard to deal with. That actually did remind me with something that I wanted to talk about, because I thought it was actually very interesting. On the Freakonomics podcast on how to be productive, there was a small talk about how productive you are when you're trying something new versus how productive you are when you try something that you're already good at or that you already have a lot of experience with. And it turns out that it's actually a lot easier to be productive at something where you still have to figure everything out than when everything is already established and you already know how to get at things, which definitely sounded super counterintuitive, but it actually perfectly connects to an idea which I've been having about games like these for quite a while, when it comes you know, not really to productivity, because this is a game in the end, and, you know, you're just playing it for fun, but perhaps more to creativity and how much you can actually achieve in the game in whatever time you're playing it. Because I also feel that in this game, if you're trying a new theme, or if you're trying a completely new idea or concept, you're better at it initially than you are eventually, when everything sort of settles down and you're used to the theme and you're used to the way this works. And I never really was able to like pin this down, but a lot of it probably does come from the fact that when you are new to something and when you are just trying something out, you try everything out. You want to look at every way you can do a certain thing, and you want to try your best to actually understand this thing and see the ways in which you can work with it. So for example, if I want to try out the Japanese theme, which I did a long time ago, but still the first time I ever tried it out, I looked up so much information about this. I was super inspired because it's something that I'd never really done before, but it was also something that I figured, hey, this looks really amazing. I actually got into talks with people about like how it works, what the ideas are behind it. So many Google Images pictures and so many blogs and stuff about Japanese architecture that just got me so inspired about it. And once I started working in game, which at the time I guess was Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, I just had all of these ideas on what to do, and I wanted to make sure that everything I did in the best way. And I just took a lot of time to figure stuff out, and while that did make me sort of unproductive in that sense, it also created some of my favorite things. And I guess the same goes for Volvara as well, which might be a great example. Before the first episode, I looked up a lot of concepts, things like that. I was really trying out everything, and I was just constantly coming up with new ideas, even though I was also very new to the concept of the flying island, of doing things this way, of using all of these pieces for a steampunk theme. So it was something that I didn't really have experience with, and yet I feel like the first episodes were still the fastest and the best, with me constantly coming up with new ways to use the objects and with new ways to integrate them in a steampunk theme. And now that everything is settled and I've already done all of those things, everything is just toned down a lot, and it's more sitting out the ride than actually doing things. And this is not really based on anything, it's just an idea that I've had, and it's very possible that you think about it in a completely different way, or that it works for you in a completely different way. But for me at least, I feel like very often exploring a new theme or exploring a new idea gets you a lot more motivated to work a lot harder, quicker and better at it than just doing something that you're already experienced at. And the same just goes for a game which is, you know, it's just a sandbox game. What the hell am I talking about? But it's, I feel like it works in the same way. And at this point, that's also why I want to keep my parks quite small, why I want to keep the areas in my parks quite small, and why I tend to hop so much from project to project. This is also probably why so many people tend to just start on a project, do some really, really good stuff on it, and then feel like they're stuck and don't really do anything anymore. I think most of the parks and coasters that all the people build just kind of end up in this sort of half-finished state where you're happy with it, but you're also like, well, now I kind of want to do something else already. And it's that kind of thing which I just started thinking about today, and the reasons why it happens, that I just feel like you might just be more productive when you're starting something new than when you're already experienced at it, in this sort of weird sense. I mean, there were studies to prove it, but then again, I'm not sure about the validity of any of those studies, and I'm not an expert on this whatsoever. I just thought that was a very interesting thing to think about, and something that did resonate with me when it comes to Volvara. Anyway, to come back to the game for a little bit and leave the philosophy behind as well, I did a little bit of detailing around the side of the coaster here, since these are really the hard parts of making the coaster. So far, I've just built a lot of the very important parts, like the tower and the dome, but they all end up with very loose ends, literally. the lower part of the dome is just a giant open gaping hole which has all of the weird scenery sticking out and poking through all of the walls. The bottoms of the towers just kind of float halfway through all of the scenery, and it's just one big mess. So I'm trying to start here already on sort of cleaning up this mess that is all this stuff that comes together. I wouldn't say that it's a bad idea to build your stuff like this. I definitely like it, and it's definitely important to make sure that your most important like visual parts of whatever are out there and working before you move into the very small nooks and crannies that you have to fill stuff in with. But it can be kind of challenging at times to try and fit all of this stuff together. This project has always also been a bit of an experiment in how compact of a ride I can really fit in with as much scenery on a very, very small floating island. Because really this footprint of this ride is super tiny, and if you were to draw it out of the context and put it on the ground, it would be nearly a family ride that just sort of weaves in and out of itself. It's very compact, and that just makes the entire thing that little bit more challenging. But yeah, basically I'm just trying to figure out how I can finish all of these little nooks and crannies, make sure that the dome doesn't end up with this super weird part where all the scenery sticks through each other and where everything looks messy. But at some point in the future, hopefully, this is all clean. So the last part here was just kind of cleaning everything up and making sure that everything connects somehow. There will definitely still be some open areas, like some little holes between the buildings that aren't properly cleaned up, but at least around the roller coaster everywhere, all the walls should be pretty flush with each other, and there shouldn't be any of those weird scenery things sticking out. But that's all just part of the challenge of trying to build that stupidly compact coaster on a small floating island. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I am quite happy with how the composition turned out, and it definitely gives a very good head start for the next episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed. See you later.